What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, you and I were just joking that if we're going to have a long episode, we're just glad it was the ACC Coastal.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. So we could talk forever on the ACC Coastal since we're basically coastal savants. So, set us up. But, this one's probably going to be one of our longer ones because we have to cover the most amount of teams. We don't have divisions. Big 12 operates a little differently.
That's right. This week we got the Big 12, and instead of doing two smaller episodes, we're just going to do one bigger episode. So if you love the Big 12, this episode is definitely for you. If you don't love the Big 12, this episode's also for you. Listen to what's going on around other conferences. We hope you learn something. And, there's some teams in the Big 12 that people love and hate, like Texas. Are they back? Oklahoma. People love and hate Oklahoma. Then you got, some of the underdogs everyone roots for. TCU, Iowa State, West Virginia, Baylor. They won 11 games just 2 years ago. Then there's the team that everyone likes to dump on, Kansas. You've got a national championship coach and Chris Kleiman at Kansas State. Matt Wells' experiment at Texas Tech. What's going on there? So these are just some of the storylines that we're going to talk about tonight. And just like with the ACC, we are going to go in order of predicted finish. So the order that we think this conference will finish in based on the regular season. So let's start at the top. And look, you and I, this is not a hot take podcast. All right. We don't do hot takes just for hot take's sake.
We try to water those down as much as we can.
Yes, we do. So I hate that this is going to be a hot take, but here it is. We are picking the Texas Longhorns to finish the regular season atop the Big 12. That's it. Here we go. Let's all get aboard this train because here comes Texas. Texas fires their head coach, Tom Herman. And this was after 3 losing seasons from 2014 to 2016. Tom Herman comes in. Honestly, he rights the ship. He recruited very well, but the problem is you're at Texas. 8-4, 9-3 isn't cutting it at Texas. So they let Tom Herman go. They bring in Alabama offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian, previously head coach at USC, offensive coordinator at Alabama, and the Atlanta Falcons. His record speaks for himself. He had previous off-the-field troubles, but he's back. He led the greatest offense in the history of college football last season. Can he right the ship at Texas?
So, we're saying yes. I came to you and I said I really don't think that this is. I think we should really pump the brakes. I think we've gotten. I think you had to talk me into it a little bit more because of their talent and because of just everything that they're about. And they. It's funny because they are super talented and they're as far as compared to the other teams in the conference with them, the blue chip ratio, they've got one of the better chances. They are actually tied with Oklahoma, both at 66% with the blue chip ratio, which, Bud Elliott from 24/7 Sports, he puts that out every year as a very helpful metric when measuring talent on rosters and ability to win a national championship. We're not necessarily going out to say that they're going to win a national title right now, but we're definitely saying that a team that won 8 games last year, that has someone who is a better leader of men and schematically an elite offensive mind, and someone who's done it before at a similar place in USC. We're talking about Steve Sarkisian, of course, head coach. We really believe that he can take an 8-win team that brought in some more talent and, take that next step. We think that there's going to be a couple things that are going to have to fall their way. We also think they're going to probably stub their toe. We'll get to that here shortly. But as far as the team itself, you've got 8 returning starters on offense, 6 returning starters on defense. As far as offense goes, you've got 4 out of 5 offensive linemen coming back. You've got Bijan Robinson as a tailback. And then really you've got 2 stud quarterbacks battling out. Nothing against Sam Ehlinger, the 4-year, Texas son who is just a great starter for them. But these 2 guys are more pro ready as far as their profile as a quarterback. You've got Casey Thompson, who finished the year last year in the bowl game, had a great bowl game, and then Hudson Card, the highly touted freshman. Both of those guys are going to battle it out. I think that either one, whoever wins that job, will have earned it because the other guy is a formidable option. So it doesn't matter to me who wins it. I think they have a very similar profile to one another. So whoever wins, I think, is going to elevate the rest of the team. Cameron Dicker is back at kicker, which, I mean, it speaks for itself. And then they return Joshua Moore at receiver, and he was their best red zone target. So 9 touchdowns last year. And I think that they spread the ball around to a lot of different players, but he had the most receiving yardage, receiving yardage and receptions. He was the highest, as well as touchdowns. So he's coming back. That's huge. One more quick thing. They're bringing in 7 transfers. Okay. And 2 of them are from Alabama. So that's a big deal just in general, because obviously Sark coming over. Keelan Robinson coming in, former 4-star. He's a running back. So adding him to the backfield mix is just, I think someone who just speaks the language already is good. And then how about this, Jacob? Someone that you and I have talked about. This guy was a 2016 recruit. Okay. Ben Davis, former 5-star middle linebacker, went to Alabama, was supposed to be the next big thing, got moved to outside linebacker, kind of got buried on the depth chart. Alabama, they're going to recruit over you if you're not performing. So the former 5-star, 24/7 does this great thing where they rate the transfer as well as the high school athlete. So 5-star in high school, the very high rating. He's a 3-star as a transfer, but we'll see if that athletic profile transfers over. I mean, 6'4", 237. He's one of these guys we've talked about. He's a super senior, taking advantage of his last year of eligibility. Going to see if he can make any inroads here on the defense, where they're replacing 2 of their 3 linebackers that start. So, maybe there's going to be some room for Ben Davis. Interested to see what the Horns are going to do this year.
I'm buying all the Texas hype. So if you're watching on YouTube, I just gave, a big hook 'em horns. If you listen to the podcast, watch us on YouTube. Great way to find us there. So Texas returning production is at 95 in the country, but as we've seen with teams that recruit well, that is not as relevant if you're recruiting really well. This is a team that this senior class was the 3rd ranked recruiting class in the country. This junior class was the 3rd ranked recruiting class in the country. The sophomore class was the 8th best recruiting class in the country. This freshman class was 15. And so honestly, the most talented people are your upperclassmen. And if Tom Herman did one thing really well, it was recruit. And Sark comes in, with the early signing period now, it's hard to have a really good first class, but he's going to know how to recruit with, him working under Saban. So can Sarkisian have an immediate impact on the offense? I think yes. I watched like a 90-minute video of Steve Sarkisian at a coach's clinic walking through his offense. I sent it to you and our friend Hunter. I was like, you have to watch this as a football guy. Like, you're going to be drooling with his scheme. I've seen this scheme. I've seen him explain it. It's hard to defend if you've got the athletes in place, and Texas has the athletes in place. That's the cover is not empty here. He is not walking into a Kansas situation where he's going to have to rebuild from the ground up. He's really just got to do some renovations inside. Like Texas has, the 8-4 is not bad. It's bad because you're at Texas. They have to get to that next tier. Now, we're not picking them to go 11-1. We are picking them to go 10-2, but we have an out of conference loss. And so that gets them at 8-1 in conference. And we have them with a tiebreaker over the team that probably 95% of you will pick to win the Big 12. And that's Oklahoma. So if there's one thing Lincoln Riley hasn't done super well at Oklahoma, it's just put Texas away. And those games have always been close. So we're picking Texas to win that game in a close game in the Red River Shootout. But we have 2 losses for Texas, 1 at Arkansas. I think this is a sneaky game for Texas. I think they for sure lose one of the first two games.
I agree.
If they don't, Texas has a really good chance to like be a playoff crasher, dark horse, ruin somebody's season this year. TCU, they also play early at TCU. They get them the week before Oklahoma. We think that's just a trap game for Texas. And TCU has played Texas very, very well. Gary Patterson pretty much has Texas's number right now. And so 10-2 for Texas. But, sitting atop the Big 12, playing for a Big 12 championship, a conference that they have not won since 2009. I'm buying all the Bijan Robinson hype. He is a great all-purpose back. He does everything. I'm with you in that I don't care who starts at quarterback. Whoever wins, like they beat another really good quarterback out. So they don't have a quarterback controversy. Like they have a good thing going on at quarterback. They've got two good guys in there. The defense last season ranked top 20 in EPA. The defense should be really good. The offense is what was kind of shaky, and I think they're going to get a more dynamic quarterback. And whoever starts, either Casey Thompson or Hudson Card, with a way more dynamic offensive scheme. The only hole I could see in the offense is they lack depth at receiver. The top is really good. They lack some depth at receiver. I'm going to say it. Texas, I'm not going to say it. We're not there yet. But, hey, they could very well be on their way to be back, right?
Oh, they could. That's a team where we are expecting, a step forward. And I agree with you. Those first two games, I mean, they're going to have that dogfight with Louisiana. And it just makes sense. If they survive that, then it's likely that they may overlook Arkansas. Arkansas is just ready for them. It's going to be Arkansas Super Bowl. Texas is coming to town. So interesting there. Well, before we transition to the next team, best thing I can do is tell you where to find everything that we're doing. Best way to do that is follow us at the Extra Point Pod on both Instagram and Facebook. You can follow the link tree there and get to our YouTube page where you can see our smiling faces and see us do the hook 'em horns, or, put the horns down if we choose to do so. You can follow us, do like and subscribe, do all those things there. You can comment. We definitely want to take some feedback moving forward. Tell us what we're right about. Tell us what we're wrong about. And then also leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe there or wherever you listen, and that will help us as well.
Next team up, and I forgot to mention Texas's win total is set at 8. We are going above that win total with 10-2 for the Texas Longhorns. Next is Oklahoma. Oklahoma is going to be a national title contender. Period. That's what they're going to be this season. The win total set at 11. I hate whole number of win totals, but let me ask you this, Daniel. Would you more likely go over or under if this was set at 11.5? What is more likely?
I think set at 11.5. I think it's more likely.
If it's at 11.5.
I think it's more likely going 11-1. I don't think it's tough to go wire to wire, man. No matter who you are,
it is.
So no matter what the schedule, I mean, whether it's an easier schedule, a tougher schedule, and so obviously last year they lost 2 games, so that was to start the year. Definitely finished on such a tear. So with that being said, they were one of the hottest teams down the stretch last year. Of course, they're going to be one of the favorites this year. They're one of the national favorites. They're still one of the national favorites that we're picking here, 11-1, or, we're not expecting them to lose a bunch of games. We're expecting them to lose a close game, be in that championship. But as far as the team goes, 6 returning starters on offense, 7 on defense. They did lose a little bit to the transfer portal. They also gained a little bit through the transfer portal. So I guess I'd be remiss to not start with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. Dude's a stud, a former number 1 overall quarterback, 5-star, sat for a year behind Jalen Hurts, had a really big showing out last year, had to get his feet under him, I think, as a starter after those first couple early season losses. But, boy, did they really open it up with him towards the end of the year. It's scary what this offense is capable of with Spencer Rattler. Now, it's not showing that they return a starting running back, but I would actually argue they're returning 2 starting running backs, because Kennedy Brooks, who sat out last year, opted out of the season. The year before, he had 2 back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, and he was in 2018, he had 8.87 yards per carry, and that's the most ever for a running back to go over 1,000 yards. So That in the Big 12, that is insane. 8.8 yards a carry. He's an elite running back. I would put him as one of the few running backs to consider for a potential Heisman. I think it's a quarterback award, but I'm talking about someone potentially getting invited. You could argue him and Spencer Rattler might switch, might split votes. So Kennedy Brooks is huge, but someone I hadn't really put a whole lot of thought into was the Tennessee transfer running back Eric Gray. Now, obviously, he was a 4-star at going into Tennessee. He's been there for a few years. We talked about Tyson Chandler in the last episode. He's transferring. There's another running back at Tennessee that transferred to North Carolina. Well, Eric Gray was his running back mate, his backfield mate. He's going to Oklahoma with 2 other Tennessee teammates. That's Wanya Morris, the 5-star offensive tackle, and Key Lawrence, the 4-star defensive back. So Eric Gray is ranked by The Athletic as the number 1 transfer this offseason. So that's something to keep in mind, that someone rated him number 1. So what's that say? I think that they have 2 home run hitting running backs. And for a team on the offensive line, they're returning, 2 starters on the offensive line, but they're bringing in Wanya Morris, who started for 3 years at Tennessee. I think that, sky's the limit for a team like that that's already explosive, bringing in explosive players and just plugging and playing. Now, they lost Charleston Rambo, but, Marvin Mims is their leading receiver, returning 600 yards last year in the shortened season, 9 touchdowns. Definitely one of the main guys. They've got just receivers for days with Jaden Hazelwood as a backup, Mike Woods transferring in from Arkansas. That's a big time get. He was a senior graduate, and he's coming in. He was definitely vital to Arkansas last year, kind of revitalizing themselves. So I look at them on offense, and I just keep thinking sky's the limit. Well, defensively, that's where all the difference is. They, under Alex Grinch, have improved each year. Last year, they moved up. Okay, so 2019, they were 102nd in yards per play. They moved up to 26th last year. That's a huge, huge jump, especially for someone like Oklahoma, because that really puts them among the top of all their peers on defense. So if they take any more of a step forward, they could stay where they're at, and I expect them to be an elite team. If they take any more of a step forward, which they're returning 11 on defense, so what does that tell you? Or I say returning 11, they're returning 7, but 11 major contributors on that defense. I'm excited to see where they finish. Oh yeah, and I didn't even mention Caleb Williams, backup quarterback. That, hey, if something bad happens to Spencer Rattler, he's one of the teams. You pointed this out off the pod, Jacob, that there's a few teams out there that could stand to get a quarterback hurt and could still make the playoff, and Oklahoma is one of those teams.
They 100% are. Oklahoma does not have a perceived weakness on this team. And let me offer some free advice for you college football fans. If you'd like to sound smart and sound like, an educated football fan in 2021, don't be that person who has the lazy take about Oklahoma having no defense, because Josh Pate mentioned this on the late kick, but if you took these uniforms off of Oklahoma and threw, I don't know, some LSU jerseys on them, some Georgia jerseys on them, so some Ohio State jerseys on them, you would think this was an elite defense. Oklahoma has all the pieces that I think it takes to be a national championship winning team. We talked about this offseason off air. We tried to put all the pieces of what makes a national championship team, and we had a few things we agreed on. One, the blue chip ratio. Bud Elliott's just masterpiece of you have to have a certain amount of talent to win a national championship. They check that box. Elite quarterback play. They check that box. A thing that's been around for a while, elite defensive line. That's been a championship contender piece for a long time. What's been in the playoff era is elite wide receiver play.
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma has all of those pieces. All of them. So there's really not a perceived weakness. If there is a weakness, it might be their secondary, maybe. But like you said, the defense has been really, really good. An elite defensive line. They might lose a regular season game, but this team is a legitimate national title contender.
Mm.
And if I'm an Oklahoma fan, I'm very excited for this season. Like, this is the year. This is the first year that Lincoln Riley has had a returning starting quarterback since the 2017 season. Baker Mayfield's last year, when he was the returning starter. Since then, they've had, now, given that they've had a Heisman in there and a Heisman finalist in there, but not a returning starter. And Spencer Rattler returns. You mentioned they're one of the few teams who can weather a quarterback injury and still make the playoffs. So sky's the limit here. Win total set at 11. We're going to go for a push. 11-1, close loss to Texas. This team is very capable of going 12-0 and being right there in the playoff hunt. Hey, what a fun rematch for the Big 12 championship. It's always a rematch in the Big 12, but Oklahoma and Texas for the Big 12 championship, that's how it should be, right? That's good for college football. That's good for ratings in a year where we expect college football to have a revitalization. This is what the fans deserve. This is fun.
Oh yeah.
Let's go to our next team, a team that a lot of people are high on. They will be in everyone's preseason top 10, a lot of preseason top 6 or 7, and that is the Iowa State Cyclones. These are my Iowa State Cyclones. 2 seasons ago, picked them to hit that 10-win mark. I was a season too early, unfortunately, but hey, now the expectations are a lot higher at Iowa State. Their returning production ranks 4th in the country. Now, this is a year where a lot of teams return a lot of production, but very few more than Iowa State, literally at 4. And their win total is set at 9.5. So a lot of high expectations for Iowa State. Can they live up to the hype?
That's going to be the big question, Jacob. I think that this is a team where you and I both believe in them. We both have been, at least believers in Matt Campbell. You've been definitely on him a lot sooner than other people have. Maybe you were a year or two too early back in the day, but I feel like he has really cultivated and, developed this roster. And the fact that they're going to be, 9 returning starters on defense, 10 returning starters on offense. I mean, anytime that happens, it's great. But a team like this, where, you talked about Texas earlier, losing a lot as far as production, they're a team that recruits high school players at an elite level. Iowa State does take more of a chance on guys that are, a little bit lower rated, but have a lot more upside, because they want to realize that over the course of their 4 years and sometimes 5 years and sometimes 6 years. So as far as the super senior goes. So Brock Purdy, you could start there at quarterback. I mean, he's solid as solid can be, as a Big 12 starting quarterback. I am kind of on the fence with him. I don't think that he's a bad quarterback at all. I think he's very much competent winning starter. I don't think that you win because of him, but I don't think you lose because of him either. So I think that that's a big deal. Breece Hall, the running back, is going to be the top running back named for everything this year, probably top returning running back in the nation, most likely. Had 1,300 yards last year, 1,500 yards last year, and 21 touchdowns. So you kind of see what they like to do by what Breece Hall's numbers were. They return, 4 out of 5 offensive linemen. And I really think, actually 5 out of 5, that's just something that I think is going to be to their benefit this year, again, is being able to do that. Some of the areas where you and I think that they might stub their toe, it's because people are going to circle them, whereas in the years past, they haven't circled them, and that's been an issue. And so I think that, those two are the biggest keys on offense. Also, Xavier Hutchinson, top returning receiver, Charlie Kolar. I mean, they return their top 6 pass catchers as far as production goes. So, you and I have looked at that as a key to returning, repeat success, returning receiving yards. That really makes things go, especially for a team that you think runs the ball at a higher clip than normal. Having that returning receiving production is going to be big as far as development going forward.
Iowa State had their breakthrough year last year. Can they repeat, or can they take another step forward? I see 2019 Iowa State like one of my favorite movies of all time. And this movie came out in 2018. I think it is the best movie of its series, and that is Avengers Infinity War. And, it looked like the Avengers had lost. Thor comes in out of nowhere, just like wrecking everyone, finally makes his way to Thanos, puts the axe into Thanos' chest, and Thanos is whispering something, and he couldn't hear him, and he says, "You should have gone for the head," and snapped his fingers and won. And I promise it's going to tie back. So Iowa State had their shot against Oklahoma last year, and they should have aimed for the head. It is hard to win a championship, and I'm including it's hard to win a conference championship. And so these teams that do it every year should be commended. Iowa State, for the way that they, are formidable in recruiting. You mentioned they develop talent. They get the right fit guys to come to Iowa State, but eventually you're going to hit your head on the ceiling with that talent. And I think Iowa State's going to do that this year. Now, it sounds like we're being negative. We're picking Iowa State to go 10-2. I just think that this is the ceiling for Iowa State, that the ceiling is losing by a touchdown to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. That's as good as it's going to get. They won a New Year's Six Bowl. This is the ceiling for Iowa State, though. There is no next step. And so when you get a shot, aim for the head, because you might not get there again. And when Texas goes and makes a what we think is going to be a great hire as a head coach, now it might be a minute before you make that Big 12 championship again. So even a team like Iowa State that returns a ton of talent and from a really good football team, I just think last year we saw their ceiling. And so they're just going to keep on keeping on. But this is the ceiling for Iowa State. 10-2 for Iowa State. 5-star culture is great. It has a ceiling. So Iowa State is who they are. They're a 10-win team. And I just don't think they're a playoff contender. They're definitely not a championship contender. They might be a playoff contender. I just think, like I said, I think they've hit their head on the ceiling. So 10-2 for Iowa State. Xavier Hutchinson will need to have another all-conference performance at receiver. That's where they lack a little bit of depth. You mentioned Brock Purdy's, returning starter. He is who he is. Breece Hall, we know who he is. They need some answers at receiver. But, yeah, we're not picking them to go back to the Big 12 championship this season. A team that you were really high on, I have come around. I was cautiously optimistic about this team.
Right.
As the TCU Horned Frogs. And TCU had, some moments last season of showing some promising stuff, and especially on offense. TCU has historically had a good defense. Gary Patterson, the defensive coach, but we saw some flashes last season on offense. TCU's win total is set at 7.5. Their returning production ranks 33rd in the country, which is pretty great. Daniel, the Horned Frogs, are they the biggest wild card in the Big 12?
I believe so. They definitely have the roadmap to beating Texas in recent years. Max Duggan at quarterback, very much a calm, cool, collected guy. You could argue that if they had him at the beginning of the year last year, that they wouldn't have lost that game to Iowa State. It was only a 3-point loss. They obviously beat Texas, and then they lost to Kansas State, lost to Oklahoma. But they're this team that's, just that next tier right after that elite group. But they return 6 starters on offense, 7 on defense. Obviously, you're going to start, talking with quarterback with Max Duggan, but at running back, I mean, Zach Evans, he's that guy that was Mr. Everything. I said last year, I think that he could be the best running back at TCU since LaDainian Tomlinson. He's just got to get his, basically his sea legs under him. They return 3 offensive line starters, but I would argue you could make an argument for a 4th with Abina is easy. He's a transfer from Memphis at left tackle, 6'8", 315 pounds. He's solidified that side of the ball. I think that he kind of brings in kind of a little swagger on that offensive line where I think Max Duggan is going to be upright, and I think that he's going to continue doing what he does. Where last year he was the leading rusher. I don't think that at their best he's going to be the leading rusher, but I do think that the read option game makes him a threat as far as just long term. He scores touchdowns. He's a good red zone guy. I think they want these running backs to kind of take a step forward this year, so we're looking for that. But bringing back their top 5 rushers from last year. No one was stood out among the rest. That's why it was a lot of running back by committee, looking for Zach Evans to take that step forward as the lead dog. And then receiver, they returned their top 4 pass catchers from that season last year. So interested to see what they do there. They also get another Memphis transfer, which is kind of interesting. You're seeing a theme here from multiple, from one team going to the same team, but you've got TJ Carter, who is a defensive back safety from Memphis, transferring to TCU. So getting a guy to, replace those 2 key safeties that were lost last year to the draft, but Trevon Moehrig specifically. So that's something to keep in mind with this, Gary Patterson defense. I do expect TJ Carter to kind of come in and start right away and kind of make a name for himself in that backfield. But returning the entire defensive line, I think, is important for TCU, which they're doing. So
this is a team that just in 2017 went 11-3. The 2 seasons following went 7-6 and 6-7, or 5-7, excuse me. Last year they go 6-4, and in the all conference COVID year, whatever. But I do think that this team, you could argue Texas, but I think this team is the biggest wild card in the Big 12 because they can ruin someone else's season. They're the team that could jump up and beat Oklahoma, beat Iowa State, beat Texas. But I think they're also liable to lose to a Kansas State, a West Virginia, a Baylor. So that's why I think they're the biggest wild card. I think the offense taking a step forward, they return all their skill players. And a big player I'm looking at is J.D. Spielman at wide receiver. He's not a projected starter, but he could be a breakout player at wide receiver. He's got some top-end speed to take the top off of defense. You mentioned Zach Evans. When Zach Evans is being recruited, I mean, the conversation was it's Zach Evans and everybody else at running back. He was far and above the best running back. He's got the skill set. Max Duggan, his legs are what makes him very, very dangerous. If his passing game improves, the ceiling is super high for that offense. But he's going to need to take a step forward in the passing game. The secondary, despite losing 2 guys to the NFL draft, they're going to be elite. TJ Carter and Noah Daniels should be 2 of the best defensive backs, honestly, in the country. I mean, it's a Gary Patterson defense. And if the offense takes a step forward, which we're expecting, this is going to be a very good football team. So the schedule lines up well for them. They have, they get, I don't even know how to say this team's name. Duquesne. Is it Duquesne?
I think so.
Wow. That's a weird way to spell that. That's a win, FCS school. But they get California from the Pac-12. They get SMU from the American. They do get both of those games at home out of conference. And then in the Big 12, I mean, you get Texas at home. You have to go to Oklahoma and to Iowa State. But we expect this team to have a really hot start. 9-3 is what we're picking for TCU. So we are picking them to beat Texas, as we mentioned before. But this is a team that, hey, we're picking to beat Texas. They could take a chunk out of their season, but this is a dangerous team that could come up and really bite anyone in the butt. West Virginia is next. Their win total set at 6.5. This is a top 20 team in returning production. They rank 19th. They loosened defensive backs, but this was a team that was a surprise in 2020. They took a giant step forward in 2020, and we're picking them to finish behind TCU in the Big 12. So, Daniel, give me your thoughts on the Mountaineers.
So they were a team that was very surprising on defense last year. Defensively, they were number 1 in just passing defense in general, and they were one of the top 2 or 3 defenses in the nation for most of the year. So definitely keep an eye there. They do lose a couple of starters Tyke Smith transfers to Georgia, and Drashawn Miller transfers to Auburn. The co-defensive coordinator, Jamal Adai, he ends up leaving to be the defensive backs coach at Georgia. So a little shakeup there defensively, but 6 returning starters. I do believe that they're going to be still a very talented, formidable group. Offensively, they've got 8 returning starters, bringing back Jared Dagey at quarterback, who had a good year last year, 2,500 yards, 14 touchdowns, 4 picks. So I think that that's a solid year. I think he could definitely build off of that. Neil Brown is a guy who, as their head coach, who we're very high on. When we spoke to Dane Young before, he was talking about his time at Troy. We definitely believe, he's a program builder, and we think that he's going to have them going in the right direction no matter what. That this offense, they return their top 4 receivers or pass catchers, excuse me. Offensive line, they're only returning 2 starters, but they're getting a big-time transfer in Doug Nestor. He was an offensive tackle, but it looks like he's probably going to kick into guard. He was a 5-star when he was being recruited. He's from the state of West Virginia, and he wanted to stay close to home. He was being recruited by everybody. You're talking Florida, Georgia, Ohio State was really big on him. He ends up going to Virginia Tech, which isn't too far from home. And then, as you know, Virginia Tech, kings of the transfer portal, out. And so he transfers from there back home to West Virginia. I expect him to have a big year, and thus I expect the offense to have a big year on the offensive line, protecting, Jarrett Dagey, and then Letty Brown at running back. Letty Brown had a great year last year, over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, nothing to snuff at. I think that this is a good duo in this backfield with Letty Brown and Jarrett Dagey. Going forward, I think that they're both going to feed off of each other. Letty Brown's a senior, Jared Dagey's a junior. So upperclassmen, guys that I think are going to lead their team to a better year than they've been accustomed to in years past. I think they're going to be a very solid team right here in the upper middle portion of the Big 12.
But there's 2 teams that I think are very similar in the Big 12. It's TCU and West Virginia. And so you'll hear some similar stuff to TCU here. Despite losing their top 2 defensive backs, the defensive backfield should still be the strength of West Virginia this year. And Alonzo Adai and Sean Mahone should be, again, 2 of the top defensive backs in the conference. And not enough wide receiver talent to really compete with the big dogs. Also similar to TCU. An X-factor player, Bryce Ford Wheaton at receiver. If he takes a big step forward, that opens up their offense a little bit more. Their best 5 players, in my opinion, are all on the defensive side of the ball. So you mentioned a couple, but Dante Stills, Sean Mahone, Nick Choi Fortune, Josh Chandler, Samito, and Kerry Martin Jr., all on the defensive side of the ball. The defense should be legit again. Can the offense do enough to stay in that top half of the Big 12? We think so. We're picking West Virginia to go 7-5. 4 of those losses in conference. They have a tougher out-of-conference schedule. So they start the season at Maryland in the Big 10. They come home and play Long Island. Then they get Virginia Tech at home. We already did the Virginia Tech preview. We are picking them to beat Virginia Tech. We're picking them to lose that Maryland game on the road to open the season. That's a tough out, Maryland is. But a 5-4 in the Big 12, hanging in that top half of the conference. And we think Neil Brown's going to continue to do a good job at West Virginia. Next, we have a team that, hey, Barton Simmons was all about them making the playoff last season. It didn't happen. But, the Oklahoma State Cowboys, Mike Gundy, it is his, 37th, 38th year at Oklahoma State. No, it's his 17th year at Oklahoma State. And this is a team that is coming off of an 8-3 season, a lot higher hopes for Oklahoma State going into the season last season. And, hey, now they lose a lot of that production they brought back last year. Can Oklahoma State do enough, similar to West Virginia, to stay in that top half of the conference? Or are they a tier above? Are they, should we consider them in that top tier, or do we have them sitting right here below West Virginia?
Yeah, it's tough because they're a team that they've kind of settled into this. Hey, they're going to win, 7 to 9, maybe 10 games a year. Under Mike Gundy and his system, he's been very solid in 16 years, 137 wins. So if you're doing the math at home, that's right about 9 wins a season on average. So definitely a good program. In years, they can be very good. Um, we stopped short of saying that they could ever really be great, just based on being in the same state as Oklahoma and in the same conference as Texas. It's going to be tough to hit you. They can hit their head on the ceiling, like you've said before. But you like to start with returning quarterback. I mean, Spencer Sanders is back. Last year, you saw the difference in their offense when he was out. They didn't move the ball as much. They also didn't turn the ball over as much. So he is a guy that when he gets the ball in his hands, he really moves it one way or the other. So I really like him as a player. I think he is fun to watch. He's one of the more fun quarterbacks to watch in the entire conference, I believe. Running and passing, I think that he makes big explosive plays happen. If he can shore up his turnover issues, that's both fumbles and interceptions, then I do think, and it's a lot of timely stuff. He's not, he doesn't have the highest numbers, but he had 8 interceptions last year, and that's enough as far as sample size for him because he missed some games where it was noticeable in all of those games. I'm worried about their receivers because they're not returning some of their top guys. Their most returning receiver is Braden Johnson, 248 yards and a touchdown is what he had last year. So he's, one returning starter, but, you worry about their upside there. I don't know if I've mentioned it yet, but 5 returning on offense, 8 on defense. I do think that defensively, they are on the upper half of the Big 12. I think that they are towards the top, actually. They're not in the category with like Oklahoma and TCU, or even for that matter, West Virginia. I think that group has kind of solidified itself, but I definitely think they're about 4th or 5th in the conference, and I think that that's going to have to help them win some games. I do think that that's going to go a long way, but losing Chuba Hubbard, that's going to be a big, big blow. He was a ton of production on their offensive side of the ball last year.
Let me start with the schedule, and then I have a take that I think we disagree on. So this will be fun. So schedule wise, they have a decently easy out of conference schedule. They get Missouri State, and they get Tulsa, which is a pretty good AAC team, and they do play at Boise State this year. That'll be kind of fun to see playing at the blue turf, but we're picking 3-0 in those games. We are picking 8-4 overall for Oklahoma State. I have a take on Spencer Sanders. He has started for 2 seasons, and I think he's holding their offense back. You mentioned turnovers have been a problem, and what I worry about is Oklahoma State's offense runs a lot of these speed out plays that should be very easy gains to like, hey, first down, go get 7-8 yards on a speed out, get your receivers the ball on the outside, and he struggles getting the ball out there on time. Then over the middle, of course, those were where those interceptions are coming in, those passes over the middle. Downfield passing, he got bailed out a ton the last 2 seasons with Tylan Wallace. And he made a ton of contested catches. That's why he got drafted as high as he did. He's a very good wide receiver. You mentioned it. With him gone, do they have enough production at wide receiver to bail him out? Do they have a guy where he can just chuck up a 50-50 ball down the sideline and have a receiver he can trust to just go up and get it? This is a make or break year for Spencer Sanders. I think this could be a season where, hey, if you find, their first 5 games, you go Missouri State, then you got Tulsa, at Boise State, Kansas State, and Baylor. What if they lose 2 of those games before the bye week? Then you're looking at, you've got a redshirt freshman in Shane Illingworth, who is a former 4-star, former top 150 player. He was the number 6 pro quarterback coming out of high school. They've got to get back up. So it's a make or break year.
Last year against Tulsa, Illingsworth, and he bailed them out of a couple of games. So I do think, he had 500 yards last year, four touchdowns. So he's I mean, I think Mike Gundy can do kind of anything with different quarterbacks, but that's a good point. Losing Tylan Wallace and those downfield passes really kind of bailing out Spencer Sanders. I could see it.
Yeah, so it's a make or break year for him. He could very much take a step forward, and it's his junior season. It's his third year in the system. So if he's going to take a step forward, it's this year. If not, is it time to make a change at quarterback? I feel like we've seen Spencer Sanders, and so if he's not taking a step forward, we already know what he is. So do you take a chance with a higher ceiling with another guy? They will have a great safety duo, one of the best in the country. Defense will be solid. Again, just like it was last year, I think that wins them a lot of games this year. That defense will be very, very good. Definitely, I think top 3 in the Big 12. But hey, 8-4 for Oklahoma State. That's another good season. I just think that's what we've come to see in Oklahoma State is these 7-5 to 9-3 seasons. That's just who they are, right? All right, let's get to this bottom half of the conference. Baylor. Baylor 2 seasons ago went 11-2. They had 2 shots at Oklahoma. Similar to Iowa State, they did not aim for the head. And last year, last 2 seasons, excuse me. Last year, I was looking at a totally different team. I looked down at a record and I was like, that is not what they did. That's not true.
That's not right. Yeah.
That's not right. I was just looking at Oklahoma State. I was like, they didn't go 8-5 in 2019. So 11-3 in 2019 after the loss of Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Last year, they go 2-7. Now, this was year 1 of a new head coach in Dave Aranda, but we talked about it. Really year 0 for these head coaches that took over during the COVID year of 2020. Weird season. Their win total set at 5.5, so better than last year. Returning production is ranked 59th, pretty average. So can Baylor take a step forward in year 2 of Dave Aranda?
On one side of the ball, absolutely. I think defensively, I think that they will take a step forward. It's returning 9 starters. Dave Aranda, obviously a defensive specialist. They're bringing in Siaki Ika, also known as Apu Ika, defensive tackle, former 4-star, who is at LSU with Dave Aranda and is now transferring in. So I think when you talk about the defensive line, when you talk about just all these guys coming back, all the linebackers, all the defensive backs, I think that they have a lot of talent. They're returning their tackles leader in Jalen Petre and their sacks leader in Terrell Bernard. So just some guys that I think are guys that you win with, or that you at least play plus defense with. So that's going to be very important. Charlie Brewer, you lose him at quarterback, but to be fair, you've lost him already because he was in and out with injuries all the time. He, he transferred out. He's now with Utah. So interesting to see. Well, when we cover the Pac-12, it'll be interesting to see how that stacks up. They've had transfer quarterbacks the past couple of years over there, but right now it looks like Jerry Bohannon, is listed as their starter. But, I would argue that Kyron Drones, a 4-star quarterback coming in, early enrollee, freshman this year out of Shadow Creek over in Texas. I think that he's probably their highest upside as far as talent goes that they've had in a while. I think that he might step in, and then at running back, they've just got a few different guys that I think, Tristan Edner, Quaylen Jones, some guys that I think, you can rotate in, but receiver wise, you've got Tyquan Thornton. He's a returning senior. Expect him to have a big year. RJ Sneed. A couple of these guys, RJ Sneed had, almost 500 yards last year. They don't have the offense this year to really push those upper teams. That's why we kind of have them in the middle of the pack. I think this defense keeps them in a lot of the games that they play, though. So you're going to see a lot of 1-score games. So that's going to be, at least with a lot of their peers. Yes, the elite teams, we do expect them to kind of run away with it. We expect them to do that with anybody. But with their peers, if it's a 1-possession game at the end, they've got a chance. So definitely expect the defense to take a step forward this year under Dave Aranda.
It's funny you say that. I wrote down the exact same stuff. Defense will be very good, I think. And you even mentioned the two players that I was going to mention. That's Jalen Petre, Terrell Bernard. Petre playing that star position. So in Aranda's defense, very important, similar to a Kirby Smart defense, but that star is the hybrid linebacker safety position. I think Jacoby Stevens during LSU's championship run, where he has pass breakups, he's getting sacks, he's getting interceptions, just a very demanding position for the defense. But when you've got an athlete like Jalen Petre, it's a great position to have on your defense. And then Terrell Bernard, inside linebacker, you mentioned, led the team in sacks. They'll be one of the best linebacker duos in the country. Defense will be solid. They play a lot of cover 2 with the Aranda scheme, which works in the Big 12 with the kind of defense, with the kind of offense you're going to face. It helps you limit the run game because when everyone's spreading the ball out, it's hard to defend the run. And so playing a lot of cover 2 and having really good athletes at safety and linebacker really help with the cover 2. But on offense, they're going to have one of the worst skill position groups in the conference, and that won't be good. Now they do bring in, a big OC hire in Jeff Grimes from BYU. That'll be good to, change the scheme on offense. They're coming off of an unbelievable year at BYU with some really great football players. But will the quarterback step up? That's my biggest question for Baylor. Who's going to play quarterback? Who's going to start? Can they step up? I'm with you. The defense is going to keep them in a lot of games. I think it's going to take the offense to win those close games. So we're picking Baylor to go a little bit above that win total at 6-6, and that'll be 3-6 in conference. Let's keep going right along. Kansas State win total set at 5.5, same as Baylor. This is year 3 for Chris Kleiman, the former North Dakota State coach. They are also top 60 in returning production, right there at 58, also very similar to Baylor. This seems like, like you said, on the peer level of Baylor.
Yeah, definitely. And, we're definitely both high on Chris Kleiman. I was probably a little higher than you when everything started, just with his pedigree at North Dakota State. I do think that's important. You come in from a winning program and instilling that in others. Deuce Vaughn is one of the best running backs in the Big 12. Obviously, you got Breece Hall and some other guys that are going to be thought of ahead of him. But Deuce Vaughn had some big games last year, 600 yards rushing and 7 touchdowns. I also love the name Deuce. So he's just the man. I expect him to have another, solid to really good year. Will Howard, the backup quarterback, actually was the second leading rusher last year. And, he actually started for much of the season because of Skylar Thompson being injured. So I think it's big that he got that experience as the starter. I also think that, that if Skylar Thompson gets hurt again, then you've got a guy that you can rely on to kind of weather the storm. Athletically, I just don't think that this team is quite, where these others may be. But that being said, they might be the best of the rest. So, they're returning 9 on offense and 5 on defense. Skylar Thompson, for me, for this offense to go, he not only has to stay healthy, he's got to take a step forward and really got to be explosive. So, if I'm not mistaken, I think he might be actually a super senior this year. He might be a 6th-year senior. He's been there for a while. I need more out of him. Deuce Vaughn not only led the team in rushing, was also leading receiver last year, 434 yards and a couple touchdowns. So kind of do it everything. You want to kind of spread, the burden of yards on that offense where it's not just him, especially now that people know his name and will know to cover him. So don't really expect a huge year out of Kansas State, but they could sneak up and grab somebody when they're not ready for it.
Yeah, we don't expect a whole lot from Kansas State. I think that his first season, they caught some people by surprise. Hey, I'll give him one thing. Chris Kleiman has not lost to Oklahoma. So undefeated against Oklahoma. Weird, right?
That is very weird.
You mentioned Deuce Vaughn, best player on the team. They're going to get some great corner play out of Justin Gardner and Julius Brents. The return of Skylar Thompson is huge because this is a team that had the fourth worst success rate in Power 5 last year on offense. So just abysmal on offense after he went out with an injury. And I'm glad he's back, but I don't expect a ton from the offense this year because the wide receiver room is really not Power 5 worthy. Like, they just don't have good skill players at wide receiver. So we're picking Kansas State to go 4-8, 2-7 in conference. They get two tough opponents out of conference. They get Nevada, who could be the best team in the Mountain West. They're going to compete for that. And then they get Stanford in Arlington opening weekend. So we're picking that Stanford game to be a loss. 4-8 for Kansas State this season.
I thought you were about to rhyme it. 4-8 for Kansas State, but
I should have. That was a perfect opportunity. Texas Tech is next to last. Win total set at 4.5. And is the Matt Wells experience soon to be over with?
It depends on who you ask, because I don't know what the expectations really are in Lubbock. I do think that it'd be nice if he made a bowl game this year for their sake. Returning Sir Thompson at running back, I think that's big. He had a good year last year, 600 yards, 8 touchdowns. Quarterback, that's going to be confusing. They lose Alan Bowman. They return Henry Colombi, who split time last year with Alan Bowman, partially due to injury, partially due to preference. But Tyler Shuck, the Pac-12 champion Tyler Shuck from Oregon, is transferring down, likely to be the starter. So, interesting to see what they might do there. 7 returning starters on offense, 8 on defense. So, you're working with something going forward. I think that, this might be one of those years where Matt Wells kind of gets a break because, everybody's returning a bunch of players. Typically you see an 8 and a 9 on each side of the ball returning, and you have high expectations. But if most of his peers are returning something close to it, then, maybe it's not so, surprising.
Texas Tech has not gotten more than 8 wins since Mike Leach left. And I don't know if that should just be the expectation at Texas Tech now. I mean, they also haven't had a winning season since 2015. So, Matt Wells has gone 4-8 and 4-6 in his first 2 seasons. We're picking them to go 4-8 again. I don't know. I don't know if 4-8 gets him fired this year. I think if they go 4-8 this year and follow it up with another 4-8 next year, he's for sure gone. I don't know if he's gone this year. I'm with you in that I don't know. I don't have a good pulse on the Texas Tech boosters and fan base with their expectations of the team for this season. But Tyler Shuck, transfer quarterback from Oregon, he did start all season, but he was also bottom 10 of Power 5 starters in turnover-worthy plays. That's one of those, PFF stats that they like to use. There are gaping holes in the defense. There's a weak offensive line. Not a lot of hope for Texas Tech, other than the fact that they do have, a really weak out-of-conference schedule. And they also get to play the worst team in the Big 12, Kansas. So Kansas, poor Kansas. They did finally fire Les Miles. Even I thought that was a bad hire to begin with. What in the world were they thinking? But Kansas actually, I think, hit a home run with their head coach hire. I was shocked that they pulled Lance Leipold out of Buffalo. And then Lance Leipold pulled it's going to be Buffalo South because he pulled 10 players in the portal with him and brought them over to Kansas.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
This will be a multi-year rebuild. I think they hit a home run higher, but the win total still set at 1.5 for Kansas.
I'm going to start by circling November 9th. Play Michigan State. Oh, wait. That's the State Farm Champions Classic in basketball. So this team is on the football field, not the basketball court. So reminder to everybody, no, this this is going to be the worst team. I do agree with you. I like their head coach hire and Leipold. I do think that long term it's going to be the right move for them. But, you know, it is what it is. This roster is devoid of talent. And, you know, they got 6 returning starters on offense, 9 on defense, but you're returning them to an 0-9 team from last year. So I don't have high expectations. We're giving them, you know, a win. So that's something, but it is what it is. This team, you know, is tough to watch and definitely has the fans clamoring for basketball season.
They have a tough out of conference schedule. Relative. It's Kansas. They go at Coastal Carolina, who's beaten them. Let's see. They've played them the last 2 seasons and they've lost both times. So they get Duke out of conference at Duke. So tough out of conference schedule. Then
Battle
they get
of the
South.
basketball schools.
That's right. Then they get South Dakota, and they're lucky it's not South Dakota State.
I was going to say they are one word from being 0 for the season. If that was South Dakota State, the Jackrabbits would have come in here and jacked them up, but it's just South Dakota. So
it has been, think about this. It has been over a decade since Kansas won more than 3 games in a season. And they're going to have to wait a little bit longer because we think they're going 1-11. But I love the hire. Keep your heads up, Kansas. It's almost basketball season.
yeah.
Hey, we did it. That's the Big 12. I think we went right at an hour. So that's the Big 12. We're picking, to recap, Texas atop at 8-1 in conference, followed by Oklahoma, Iowa State, TCU, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Baylor, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and Kansas. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to follow us on social media. You can follow Daniel on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. But that would do it for this edition of The Extra Point. He is Daniel. I am Jacob. See ya.